Welcome to the course. The first thing we're going to do is get a brief overview of what spiritual naturalism is. The founder of the Spiritual Naturalist Society, B.T. Strain, gives us a picture of the goal here. He says this, meaning spiritual naturalism, is nothing less than a path to freedom. Freedom from fear and from the bonds of circumstance as a condition for happiness. We're going to gradually discover what that means throughout the course. But first, let me give you a picture. Having left the supernatural behind, some of us are waking up to the idea that there is still something significant about the experience of walking into a cathedral, drumming traditional rhythms in unison with your fellows, or sitting with a giant redwood tree. There is a subjective quality to those experiences that is deeply profound and meaningful, but which doesn't seem adequately acknowledged as such or cultivated systematically outside of religion. There's also something significant about living ethically and becoming an ever more effective agent in the world. And while no one, religious or otherwise, would argue with that, it can be difficult to find a space outside of religion where one can be reminded on a regular basis to take time out to contemplate your highest ideals and systematically strive to institute them every day of your life. In response to these shortcomings, spiritual naturalism seeks to integrate the best qualities of religion with a fully modern, scientific, and naturalistic mindset. So what is spiritual naturalism exactly? The back pocket definition that I usually give to others is that it's for people who don't believe in anything supernatural, but who may feel an almost religion-like awe and wonder in the face of nature, and who may find something of deep value in certain traditionally religious practices, like meditation and ritual. Spiritual naturalism, which is also called religious naturalism, is actually an umbrella term applicable to a variety of different paths and traditions. Some of them, such as secular Buddhism and humanistic Judaism, infuse traditional religions with today's best scientific evidence. Others blaze a trail outside traditional religions altogether, perhaps focusing on awe and wonder before the cosmos, or on spiritual approaches to the environment. All of these paths share one crucial feature, namely, the integration of naturalism and spirituality. What do those terms mean? Let's start with naturalism. Naturalism is a view in which only natural causes affect the universe. Nothing outside nature, nothing supernatural can do so. Rather, all things are connected by a web of cause and effect in which everything is caused by something else. Through cause and effect, the universe is one interconnected whole. Now, told in narrative form, the pattern of that great whole is often called the epic of evolution, the universe story, or big history, and it gives inspiration to many spiritual naturalists. And that pattern also includes us. We are a part of, and in a sense, one with nature. And like everything else in the universe, we are one whole. There is no duality of body and soul. Rather, body and mind are actually two sides of the same coin. And that goes for any supposedly immaterial beings, too. There is no evidence to date that a mind can exist separately from a physical body of some kind, so the idea that there could be immaterial entities like gods, ghosts, or spirits out there is simply not supported by evidence. Of course, you cannot prove a negative, so when people say you can't disprove the existence of God, that's true. And that's just how it is. We could discover one day that there really is such a being, but we also have to look at probabilities. And with current evidence, the likelihood of such an eventuality is exceedingly low. Naturalists accept such probabilities and then simply get on with life. Now, regarding this matter of evidence and probabilities, naturalism gives credence to things that we can observe or directly conclude from observation. So we don't accept revelation, scriptural authority, psychic intuition, or anything like that. Instead, we use systematic observation, and the best tool we have to date for that is science. But, of course, there are limits to what science has been able to investigate effectively. And because of that, as naturalists, we have to take a humble approach to knowledge. For those things where we don't have good evidence, we don't leap to an answer and we don't assume to be true whatever we feel in our heart. We just say, We don't know. And we're fine with that. And by the way, even things that have good evidence today can always be overturned by new evidence in the future. So even our most cherished, dearly held beliefs may have to be abandoned. And we simply accept that as a condition of living truthfully in this naturalistic universe. So what about spirituality? Well, it comes from the Latin root spiritus, meaning wind, breath, or essence of something. That last part is as in the spirit of the law or school spirit. And so we can say that the spiritual is concerned with the spirit or essence of life. But what is the essence of life? Philosophers could have a heyday with that question. But in general, spirituality, in the sense we're using it here, involves growth, connectedness, and moral activism. In short, endeavoring to live this one life meaningfully rather than wastefully, responding appropriately to each moment within the context of whatever larger traditions, groups, causes, or ideals to which you may devote yourself. And there's something deeply valuable, even sacred, about that. Living in such a way that you participate fully and meaningfully in life. Each different path may have a different interpretation of precisely what that entails, but at root, it's about making the most of existence in this natural universe. And so we can say in summary that spiritual naturalism is a collection of paths concerned with the essence of this life in this one natural, interconnected, and sacred universe. Now that collection of paths includes naturalistic forms of particular religions like secular Buddhism, humanistic Judaism, Christian naturalism, and naturalistic paganism, as well as paths unattached to any particular religion or even secular altogether, like certain forms of spiritual ecology, ancient philosophy, and humanism. Now, many of these paths involve such practices as meditation and ritual, but embraced from a naturalistic perspective. Okay, this is the part where people tend to do a double take. Popular perception sees these practices as so wedded to supernatural beliefs as to be unimaginable for naturalists. How is it possible to embrace them without contradiction? Well, at root, this aspect of spiritual naturalism is based on a very simple and common sense fact of life that is nevertheless so taken for granted as to go virtually unrecognized. And that fact is this. All experiences, including religious ones, are embodied, occurring by way of basic physiological processes universal to the species. Consequently, the same physiological body states evoked in supernatural belief contexts may be invoked in other belief contexts, including naturalistic ones. For example, ritual can be as powerful for a naturalist in awe of the universe as for a theist in awe of a deity. Both share the same basic physiological state of awe. So naturalists, no less than theists, can systematically cultivate rich experiences like awe and wonder. But what about other aspects of spirituality? Where does moral activism enter the picture? Spiritual naturalists are often deeply involved in such activism, but the Spiritual Naturalist Society, as an organization, takes a different approach than most. Instead of focusing directly on the issues, which can prove divisive, the Society focuses on empowering individuals to be effective agents of change for whatever causes you feel are worthy. Most other atheist and agnostic organizations focus on science and activism without providing any in-depth understanding of how you get from one to the other. How do you take the givens described by science, what you get from your genes and environment, and transform yourself to be a more effective agent? Now, a few see the glaring gap here and turn to religions to get practices designed to help, like meditation and ritual, but it's often difficult to see how these practices relate to scientific evidence. Another step is needed, focusing on the core human capacities that underlie such practices. That will be the focus of our course. We'll link scientific evidence-based understanding on the one hand with transformative practices on the other, all of which is aimed ultimately at empowering a life of activism. Specifically, the core capacities we'll be exploring are encapsulated in the Spiritual Naturalist Society's own motto, happiness through compassion, reason, and practice. First, we'll look at emotion with compassion as a specific example. Then we'll look at reason. Next, we'll look at practice. And finally, we'll look at happiness. How can emotion, reason, and practice work together to conduce to the emergence of happiness? Now, before moving on, we should set the tone by asking what we mean by happiness, because there are two different kinds. The first is the feeling of positive enjoyment, which psychologists call hedonic happiness. Now, this is wonderful when you have it. However, it does tend to be fairly fleeting. We quickly adapt to things that give us pleasure, like a new house or car, and then no longer derive enjoyment from them. The other kind is a sense of flourishing, of leading a good life, a worthwhile life, a meaningful life. Psychologists call this eudaimonic happiness, and it tends to result from self-actualization and pursuing long-term goals, and consequently tends to be more stable over time. And religious and philosophical traditions agree. They have long aimed more at the meaningful side of life. For example, Christians emphasize leading a moral life of love and charity, while Buddhists stress non-attachment and Taoists harmonizing with the flow of nature. In all these cases, it is the way the individual fits into the big picture, their meaningful relationship to the whole, that is at the heart of it all. Now, in this course, we'll often make reference to a larger meaningful context, and it's this sort of big picture perspective that we mean. There is a kind of happiness that transcends the ups and downs of particular circumstances. Already we're beginning to see what B.T. Strain means by freedom from the bonds of circumstance as a condition for happiness. Even at times when circumstances make life unpleasant, we can still find another kind of happiness. So what is the goal of all this? The goal is just simply to become wiser and live better over time. Nothing superheroic, just to become a little wiser and to live a little better over time.